concludes the first debate, and we will now move to the second debate in backbench time. The backbench motion on the potential merits of a British Jewish History Month. I call Nickie Aiken to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this House has considered the contribution of the British Jewish community and the potential merits of a British Jewish Month. I'd like to first thanking the Backbench Business Committee who agreed to this debate, and for the over 40 members of Parliament who signed my application from across the House, and particularly the Honourable Member for East Renfrewshire and my Honourable friend for Hastings and Rye for attending the Backbench Committee meeting with me to support me. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have thought long and hard about the timing of this debate, particularly after the October the 7th horrendous attacks and the rise of anti-Semitism that we have seen in this country. Over 1,300% increase in anti-Semitism in London alone in the last year. But I am very certain that we cannot conflate British Jews with the State of Israel. The actual meaning of British Jews is that they are British citizens. It was really brought home to me when I met a group of British Jewish school children in November on behalf of my right honourable friend, the member for Finchley and Golders Green. There were 10-year-olds wearing baseball caps, and when I asked the teacher why are they wearing baseball caps, he told me it was because they had to hide their kippas. And I just thought, how can we get to a state where British children are hiding their identities? And it made me think, you know, what we have to do is we have to celebrate the British Jewish community and thank them for their outstanding, significant contribution that they have made in this country. I'd also like to thank Jonathan Abro, who is a constituent of mine, who led me to also think it was time that we had to change the narrative of the British Jewish community in this country, because he was incensed by Westminster City Council's newsletter on hate crime, which didn't mention anti-Semitism. I know the Jewish community is interested in its own history. The Jewish Historical Society was established in Victorian times, but it is now time, I believe, that the whole nation celebrates the history of our Jewish friends and neighbours. The Jewish community is such a small one, 280,000 British citizens identified as Jewish in the 2021 census. That is 0.5% of our population. Compare that to 6.5% of Muslims, 1.7% of Hindus. For a small minority, the impact the British Jewish community has made in all walks of life in this country is outstanding, and that is why we need to establish a British Jewish History Month. We know that Jews throughout the centuries have arrived in the UK fleeing persecution and murder from other countries and have had to rebuild their lives here. I will give way.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to Honourable Member for securing this debate. Jews have really given a huge contribution to the country over many centuries. In fact, over 200 Jews have served in this chamber. By my count, 218, but that could be contested, including 70 Labour members of Parliament. I want to give example of one, very briefly. Manny Shinwell, who was a trade unionist who served here and served in the other place until he was 101 and did great things in the Attlee government, showing that we are right across the breadth and spread of the political establishment of the United Kingdom.
Nationalise the stuff.
Member for his intervention, and I will be making reference to Jewish politicians in my speech. But Jews have had to come to this country quite often to rebuild their lives, and this was brought home to me particularly when reading Lord Danny Finkelstein's book, Hitler, Stalin and Mum and Dad. Danny's family history is sadly not unique, but it is a clear example of how two families rebuilt their lives after suffering such trauma, and whose members went on to make significant contributions to both Jewish and British history, including the establishment of the Wiener Holocaust Library. British Jews have played key roles and made major contributions over centuries in the fields of business, science, the arts and politics. In business, perhaps the most loved retail brand we have in this country is Marks & Spencer's, established by Michael Marks and Thomas Spencer. The largest supermarket in this country is Tesco's, founded by Jack Cohen in 1919. Other businesses of note, cinema chain Odeon, Moss Bros, GlaxoSmithKline. All of them have been started by Jewish Brits and have provided so much jobs and so much prosperity to this country. In science, Rosalind Franklin was responsible for discovery of the structure of DNA. Sir Ernst Chain, the co-developer of penicillin. Lord Robert Winston, now based in the other place, a pioneer of fertility treatment, responsible for goodness knows how many children being born in this country and across the world. In the arts, Michael Balcon co-founded the Ealing Studios, one of the most important British studios of this day. The Ealing Comedies came from that studio and started the careers of Sir Alec Guinness and Peter Sellers. Sam Wanamaker rebuilt the Globe Theatre just down the river from us, perhaps one of the most important cultural contributions of the 20th century. Shakespeare's A Merchant of Venice was probably played there. Another example of witnessing historical incidents of anti-Semitism. Monty Norman wrote the James Bond theme, which was then rearranged by John Barry. Actors of stage and screen are absolutely part of our establishment. One of my personal favourites is Dame Maureen Lipman, an outstanding actor, but also a campaigner to ensure that anti-Semitism is understood. And perhaps, Madam Deputy Speaker, one British Jewish male who is responsible for bringing us all together every couple of years to sing and to hopefully bring football. Football is coming home. David Baddiel. Obviously, the English Lionesses have brought football home. We're still waiting for the boys to do it, but I'm sure they will eventually. Turning to politics, the first Jewish MP was Lionel de Rothschild, representing part of my seat, the City of London. Lionel first took his seat in 1847, but it wasn't until 1858 and the Jewish Relief Act that he was recognised as a Jewish MP. The first Jewish peer was his son, Nathaniel. Westminster City Council, where I was proud to be a councillor for 16 years, has been well served by Jewish councillors, both Labour and Conservative, over the decades, including council leaders Dame Shirley Porter, Melvyn Kaplan and latterly Sir Simon Milton. A major political influence on me personally was Simon, as leader of Westminster City Council and later Boris Johnson's right-hand man at City Hall when Mayor of London. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have a British Jew who is probably responsible for my start of my political career when I met the honourable member, my honourable friend, the member for Harlow at Exeter University in our first week there. In the first conversation we ever had, he told me I was a Conservative and I had to join the Conservative Party, and the rest is history. In my constituency, we have evidence of the Jewish presence since Roman Britain. And in Threadneedle Street, the Bank of England is situated there on the site of the London home of Aaron of Lincoln, a Jewish banker who died in 1186. Those familiar with the City of London will have come across the street called Old Jewry. The name is hardly a coincidence because the great Synagogue of London was based there until it closed in 1272, a few short years before the Jews of England were formally expelled in 1290 by Edward I. It was only in 1656, during the protectorate of Oliver Cromwell, that Jews were invited to return, while Jewish communities would subsequently flourish all over England and further afield in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. I am proud that once again my constituency was the heart of the Jewish Renaissance in this country. And it's home to Bevis Marks, which was built in 1781 and is the oldest continuous synagogue in Europe today. The first Jewish Lord Mayor was Sir David Solomons in 1855. And Madam Deputy Speaker, tens of thousands of Jewish soldiers fought bravely in both the First and Second World War. 5 Jewish soldiers have received the Victoria Cross, and today, even now, every year, the Association of Jewish ex-servicemen and women hold a Remembrance Day parade at the Cenotaph the Sunday after the official Remembrance Day. Having researched this topic, I could speak for hours on the contribution made by individual Jewish people, but I wanted to pinpoint one person today who I think has made the most significant contribution in this country over decades, and that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is Dame Esther Ranson. She started so many incredible campaigns and has made a huge impact on my life, particularly starting with her That's Life programme, where she highlighted in the early 80s the Ben Hardwick organ donation campaign, which encouraged more people to take on organ donation. I carry an organ donation card because of that campaign. Seatbelt campaign, where she changed the law to make sure that children would be wearing seatbelts in the back of cars. And I note that the father of the house is in his place, and I know he played a significant part in that campaign. Perhaps the most significant campaign she has been involved in, though, since is Childline, and lifting the lid of the heinous crime of child abuse and giving children victims a voice. And I think the work that she has done on Childline, which is now run by the NSPCC, has actually changed the way we deal with child social services as well, and has made a significant difference to many children's lives. She's now moved on to Silverline and outlined the loneliness that so many older people do suffer from, and has helped trying to change their lives. The new film, One Life, tells the story of the kinder transport set up by Nicholas Winton, and there's a scene in the film where all the survivors on That's Life stand up and thank him. One of those survivors was one Susie Lind, the grandmother of one of my closest friends, Daniel Astaire. She is now at the end of her life, sadly, but she has not stopped campaigning, and with her assisted dying campaign, she is trying to make sure that we all have a good death. I want to pay tribute to Dame Esther and thank her from the whole nation for her outstanding contribution over the last 50 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is perhaps no coincidence that today is Rosh... I'm going to get this wrong. Rosh Chodesh, the new lunar month. It is an important day of renewal in the Jewish faith and the Jewish month of Shavat, which also begins today. One of the great verses from the 15th day of Shavat that Moses spoke goes as follows. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of ages past. Ask your parent who will inform you, your elders who will tell you. It is there fitting to debate the merits of a British Jewish History Month. It is right that we already celebrate the achievements of many minorities in this country and continue to educate future generations with Black History Month, LGBT History Month, Pride, Islamophobia Awareness Month. The United States established Jewish American Heritage Month nearly 2 decades ago, and I believe it is now time we remind ourselves of the remarkable contribution the Jewish community has made for our nation, often after suffering the greatest hardships, and to celebrate the value of difference. It is time we use the achievements of the British Jewish community to remind ourselves of the values we all share, and remind ourselves that this small minority is British. I hope the government will take this on board and consider introducing a British Jewish History Month.
The question is, as on the order paper, we will start with a time limit of 6 minutes, but that will rapidly decrease to 5 minutes. And if anyone wants to complain, they can ask their colleagues to leave, because that's the only way you get any more time. Fabian Hamilton.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a privilege to speak in this debate opened so well by the Honourable Member for the cities of London and Westminster, and I thank her and all her colleagues for tabling this motion today. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to represent a constituency with the largest Jewish population in Yorkshire, or in fact, indeed, on the entire east side of the United Kingdom. For over 150 years, Jewish people in Leeds have contributed so much to our city's culture, economy and society. They stood at the front line of the battle against Oswald Mosley's fascists in the Battle of Holbeck Moor in 1937, and have often been at the forefront of our local political history across the city. Now, the Jewish community in Leeds has a fantastic history, and it's going from strength to strength in 2024. And this is thanks in no small measure to the hard work and dedication of everyone in the community. But I'd like particularly to thank the Leeds Jewish Representative Council and the Jewish Leadership Council for the work they do to strengthen and represent the Jewish community in my constituency, as well as for the fruitful relationship we've had and enjoyed for many decades, especially the current leadership, Simon Meyerson, KC, and Lawrence Saffer, who have done a brilliant job. In Leeds, we have Reform and Orthodox synagogues, we have a flourishing kosher bakeries, butchers, and the world-renowned Marjorie and Arnold Ziff Community Centre. For more than 100 years, the Leeds Jewish Welfare Board and the Leeds Jewish Housing Association has supported at least 20% of the Jewish community in Leeds, and it's provided mental health support too, residential care for people with learning disabilities, practical help for struggling families, and much, much more. And especially given the current cost of living crisis, this work could not be more important than it is today. I want also to reflect on the legacy of a woman I had the privilege of knowing as a close friend for many years, and that's Sheila Saunders, who died nearly 10 years ago. She was Chief Executive of the Welfare Board and the Housing Association, and along with her friend Elaine Grazin, they helped to found Leeds Jewish Women's Aid in the 1980s, the only specialist organisation in the United Kingdom supporting Jewish women and children affected by domestic abuse and sexual violence. I still miss Sheila every single day. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Member for Cities of London and Westminster mentioned Danny Finkelstein's book, which I'm proud to have been given a copy of and which I'm reading at the moment. And it reflects in many ways the story of my own family. And I hope the House will crave my indulgence in the last 3 minutes I have to tell them a little bit about my own family's history, because in many ways that sums up the history of the Jewish people in this country, the British Jews, as the Honourable Member said just earlier. My father, Mario Rinaldo Uziel, came to this country in 1934 to escape the increasing persecution of Jews across Europe. His family lived at the time in The Hague, but they moved very quickly to Paris. They lived in several major cities across Europe, and my father himself was born in Vienna. When he arrived at Brentwood School in Essex, a boarding school, he could not speak a word of English at the age of 12. But very quickly, he learnt to master English. So much so that by 1942, when he'd only been in the country 8 years and still had Portuguese citizenship, he volunteered for the British Army. But because his first language was French, the Special Operations Executive, SOE, nabbed him and said, "You're a French speaker. We need you to help the resistance in France." Dangerous for a Jewish man, but nonetheless, he volunteered to do it. I don't know what part he played in the resistance. I know about his training, but he never spoke about his experience in occupied France. Probably for very good reason, but certainly because he'd signed the Official Secrets Act. I still have, Madam Deputy Speaker, the document that my father signed in 1948, pledging his allegiance to King George VI so that he could become a naturalised British citizen. There is an example of somebody who started his life as a continental Jew speaking French, whose family is originated from Bulgaria, from the Ottoman Empire, from Thessaloniki, then known as Salonika, where my grandfather was born, but who proudly became an Englishman. He never had an accent. He learned English early enough to avoid speaking with any accent, unlike, by the way, both my grandparents, one of whom had a French accent, the other a German accent. On my mother's side of the family, we have a very proud connection to the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, whose Aunt Rose was also my Aunt Rose, Rose Goldberg. And she lived until the end of her life, she only died about 15 years ago, in Bronsbury Park, which is very near where I grew up in Willesden. So, finally, before my time is up, I just want to pay tribute to some of the Holocaust survivors who found their homes here in Britain, especially 3 of my constituents, one of whom is no longer alive. One of them is Trudy Silman, who is 95 this year. Trudy escaped from Bratislava to come to the city of Leeds, and she qualified in biochemistry, the first woman to qualify with a biochemistry degree from the University of Leeds. She is still as clear and as articulate as she ever was at age 95, a very active mind. The second is Eric Hirsch, who was in the Polish ghetto in Łódź and was taken to the concentration camps and finally released from Auschwitz when he was 16 years old. And the third was Ibi Nil, who wrote 2 excellent books but has sadly passed away just 2 years ago. Along with the many Holocaust survivors, they contribute to our collective knowledge of Judaism here in the United Kingdom, and we're proud British Jews.
Thank you. After the Father of the House, the time limit will go down to 5 minutes, which we have to strictly enforce, or else not everybody will have the chance to speak. Sir Peter Bottomley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I say it's an honour to follow the honourable gentleman and thank him for what he's done. He does remind me of the book written by our former colleague Tristan Hunt about the original Champagne socialist, the communist Frederick Engels, and the lives that people had in his part of the world, in north of London. And can I also say that the book by Hadley Freeman, House of Glass, is one I would commend, 3 years old, about how her family came to survive and what their lives have been like. Were we to be having a debate on the history of Muslims in this country, or Hindus, or Sikhs, I think we'd have the same kind of attendance. What's different about Jewish history was put to me by one of my constituents after October the 7th, which was, why do they keep picking on us? There are 16 million Jews in the world, of whom about 250,000 are in this country. Their contributions have been magnificent, and not just those who are known. In my previous job, which was some time back, I put neon lights outside theatres and cinemas in the West End. Our painter said to me one day, could he have a day off? I said, of course. Why? He said his mother had died. I said, can I come to the funeral? And he burst into tears. Because he was Jewish, he didn't know anybody else knew it, and the idea that someone would volunteer to come to this kind of family event overcame him. It shocked me that someone in my country could be feeling like that. My honourable friend, and I thank her for introducing this debate, mentioned Esther Ransom. I hadn't actually thought that Esther Ransom was Jewish until I went to her wedding, and seeing Desmond Wilcox trying to become Jewish in terms of music and dance and everything else was just amazing. But it's not just the significant people you need to worry about. When I went on almost a pilgrimage to Gallipoli to see the graves and the names of the people in my constituency who had died, I kept coming across memorials to Jews who had served in our armed forces. The same thing applies in every walk of life, whether notable or just noticed if you keep your eyes open. I think that one of the reasons why I've supported the proposals of the National Holocaust Memorial Commission to have a memorial and to have a learning centre, and the stipulation by the National Holocaust Memorial Foundation that the majority of the money should be spent on education, because I've gained, by knowing since that proposal first came out, how many of my grandfather's extended family died in the Holocaust. We thought it was 11. It went up to 60. It's now well over 100. That's the kind of education that matters, and I hope that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, if there are some, will actually learn about our history and how inclusive it is, and how it's chance that allows some people to go on and put down roots, and others don't get the chance because of ideology or murderous habits of too many people. I also want my children and grandchildren to know about the way Jews have been treated in this country over the last 800 years or so. It's not been good, it's not been easy. And I remember every time I go to church that Jesus was not a Church of England white Englishman. We have to remember our shared history and try to adjust the way we work together. And I don't just want to talk about the Abrahamic faith, because the same thing applies to the other faiths that have different traditions and different origins. Our future is together, and the sooner we learn about what we can about each other and what we share, the better. Having said that, I also want to mention, my honourable friend mentioned Simon Milton. I've been to two Jewish, well, more than two Jewish funerals, but when the bones were discovered in the Imperial War Museum, I went out to New Bushy, where they can't even show where the cemetery is for the fear of being attacked. And when I went to the service for Simon Milton, that again had to have strict security. One of them, a member of the Community Security Trust, came up to me and said, "You're Peter Bottomley?" I said, "I am." He said, in words which I can almost hardly say, "You're one of the people where I believe it's safe to remain in this country. If we can defend each other, we can do better together."
5-minute limit. Ian Paisley.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The motion before the House, so ably put to us today, poses the question of the potential merits of Jewish History Month. Potential merits. Already we have heard the wonderful stories. This is not about merit. This is a necessity. We must have such a thing in order that we can promote learning as the Father of the House has said, promote understanding, historical knowledge, because it's through that understanding of the historic place of the wonderful contribution many Jewish citizens have made across these islands that we will then ensure that the hatred and the anti-Semite attitudes that have pervaded too often, that they will be put away with. And so I commend the member for moving us and say, yes, absolutely, in the affirmative, we must have such a month. The Holocaust Educational Trust, which again has been cited by members already, has demonstrated that and proved how necessary historical knowledge of the torture and the persecution and indeed of the Holocaust in itself, and how necessary it is for children of today. And therefore, taking forward that lesson, let's of course apply that. Many people of today proudly already boasted of the great contribution Jewish people have played, not only in their own lives, in their own constituencies, and across this country. The President of Israel today, Isaac Herzog, who was previously, I think he held 3 ministerial posts, his father before him was also, he was the 6th president, Shem Herzog. Shem was born in Belfast, in Cliftonville Avenue. His father, Rabbi Herzog, the Rabbi Herzog, he lived in Dublin. He was known, believe it or not, as the Sinn Féin Rabbi, because he was so pro the new Dáil Éireann that had been created, and he was recognised. Can I just say, today it hurts my heart so much of the horrible attitude some people, and I just say some people from a Republican background, now have towards the Jewish people and towards the State of Israel. But because their history, the history of the Irish, is so strong with regards to that, that founding fathers within the Jewish tradition, and then later on within the Israeli state, have actually hailed from Ireland, from both north and south, and they've made a wonderful contribution. Indeed, in our own history, Harland and Wolff, our great shipbuilding heritage, guess who Mr. Wolff was? He was a prominent Jewish politician from Belfast, and he made a wonderful contribution. He was a close friend of Sir Otto Jaffa. I think he was Mayor of Belfast, Lord Mayor of Belfast on at least 2 occasions, and a leading politician, president of the Belfast Hebrew congregation as well, and he served our country so well. So this remarkable history that we have, let's not only embrace it, but let's not hide it. Let's not put it under a bushel. Let it shine and let people understand that the tapestry, the rich tapestry of the heritage of the Christian and the Hebrew and Arabic heritage that pertains on these islands is strong and must be encouraged for all to see and to understand our future. Thank you.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Pleasure to speak in this debate, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for the cities of London and Westminster, for securing this debate, and agree with everything that's been said so far on the need for us to have a Jewish History Month. And as others have said, the history of Jews in Britain is wound up in the history of this country, but it is also sadly a complex history at times. In my own part, in my region of Yorkshire, that is demonstrated very clearly by the 2 cities nearest to me, one of which I grew up in. One of those, of course, is the city of York, which people will remember from the 1190 massacre of Jews, but which continues to have a thriving Jewish community today. History of Jews in York continues in that city, but is also, of course, wrapped up in the names of places in that city, including Dewberry, where my own ancestors lived. It is also a relationship that in more recent decades has had its complexities, and we see it at the moment with the rise in anti-Semitism. And in my own city of Birth, Hull, we of course had the Battle of Corporation Field in 1936, when Mosley and his British Union of Fascists turned up to be met by a crowd of 10,000 people, who I'm proud to say were mainly there to see them off, and that is indeed what happened to them. But I want to talk specifically today about the contribution of Jews from the city of Hull, and Hull's place actually in Jewish history more broadly. We have a very small community in Hull today, but its contribution to Jewish history is indeed very, very significant. And that role is especially big in the role of the transmigration of Jews fleeing Eastern Europe at the end of the 19th century, who passed through the city of Hull, largely on their way to North America. So many came to Hull, we were actually marketed as Britain's cheapest port. Now, we don't like to think of ourselves as cheap in the Humber, but that's what we were at the time. And it is estimated that over 2.2 million emigrants passed through the city of Hull during the period, the century before 1914. 100,000 passed through the nearby fellow Humber port of Grimsby. Most of those, as I say, passed through on their way to North America and to other cities, Leeds, Manchester, but a small number remained in Hull. And indeed, at its height, the Jewish population of Hull was made up 1% of our population, but had a huge impact on the life of the city. And I want to talk a little bit about the contribution of some of Hull's Jewish ancestors in the arena of public life in particular. Between 1856 and 1983, Hull had 2 Jewish mayors, 7 Jewish lord mayors, a Jewish leader of the council, and I'll say something about that Jewish leader of the council who served as leader, an effective leader, from 1945 until 1979. And this is a very consensual debate, but I must just disagree very slightly with my honourable friend who talked about the cities of London and Westminster being the city or the part of this country where Jews have had the most impact. Well, there's a whole newspaper editor, Arthur Tidman, said in the 1940s, there is no town, no city of the UK where Jews have been more closely identified with public life or where their natural abilities have been more freely exercised to the advantage of the community than Hull. It is doubtful any other city can equal the record of Hull in the number of Jewish citizens who have filled the highest civic offices. And chief among those was Alderman Sir Leo Schultz, who was the Labour leader of Hull from 1945 until 1979, was elected to the council in 1926, had previously won a scholarship to Oxford, but was told he couldn't attend because of his background. So he took his fight into politics, became elected councillor in 1926, and had the foresight before the war to build bomb shelters, even in opposition to the government at the time, who in the end relented and paid for those shelters to be built. And people like my grandma, who were bombed out of their homes in the second night of bombing in 1941, may not have survived were it not for his foresight. He had such an impact on our city. He remained as leader until 1979, was knighted, and of course went on to become an alderman, and there is a statue of him. And he's just one of a number of other individuals, whether it's our previous mayor, Henry Feldman, Alderman John Simons, who have had such an impact on public life in not only our city but in our country.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's an honour to follow the member from Brigg and Goole. And it's a pleasure to take part in this debate. And I'd like to thank the member for Cities in Westminster for securing it, particularly at the moment. But coming as it does at a time when we are acutely aware of the critical growth in anti-Semitism in this country, it would be tempting to focus on that issue and that issue alone. But serious as it is, I don't think it is the reason why, or at least the sole reason why, we should be thinking about a British Jewish History Month. You see, when I started thinking about this debate, I did not realise how limited my own appreciation was of the contribution which the Jewish community has made to the rich, diverse culture which we enjoy across the UK. Yes, of course, I was aware of some of the entertainment figures, most of the entertainment figures and industrial figures which have already been mentioned, and of the political figures. Who could not be aware of Manny Shinwell, of our own Liberal leader Herbert Samuel, and of course people like Malcolm Rifkind, who've graced this place. And one of my favourite authors, if I might focus on Scotland for a minute, is Edinburgh's own Muriel Spark, who gave us some real gems, including, of course, the unique prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Spark was certainly herself amongst the creme de la creme, not just of British, but of international literature. and what a contribution she has made. But what I didn't know was that my own alma mater, the University of Glasgow, was groundbreaking when in 1787 Levi Myers graduated without having to take a Christian oath, and that attracted an influx of students to Scotland. The majority of Scotland's Jewish community does continue to live in and around Glasgow, many of them descended from those who came here to escape the Russian pogroms in the 1880s. It was apparently cheaper to live in Glasgow in those days than it was in Edinburgh, and I have absolutely no comment to make about the current situation in the housing market. But a few hardy souls have made it across to our side of Scotland over the years. Indeed, in Scotland, the history of Jewish communities can be traced back to Edinburgh in 1691, when the minutes of Edinburgh Town Council recorded the application of David Brown, a professing Jew, to reside and trade in the city. And 1816 saw the first formal Edinburgh Jewish community of around 20 families founded. 1825 saw the acquirement of a tenement enrichment court in Newington, which became the synagogue with 67 seats. And by 1900, the community had reached around 500. In 1909, the Edinburgh University Jewish Society was founded and is the oldest in Scotland, possibly Britain, and is currently the fastest growing. Sadly, my more recent interaction with the Jewish community has been as a result of the rising tide of anti-Semitism. I met Rabbi Rose in a pub near that synagogue in Newington to discuss how I could support our local community at the moment. I've done a tour of North London with CST and heard heartbreaking tales from Jewish school children of the anti-Semitism which they face on an all too regular basis. I met Lord John Mann to discuss his report on anti-Semitism in the UK. And last year, I presented a bill to try to force social media companies to report an action taken against abuse of people with protected characteristics, which would include religion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to come back to my original point, though. Anti-Semitism should be a problem that we overcome, like Islamophobia and every other form of religious, racial or personal discrimination. It should never be the dominant or only factor when we take into account what our Jewish community has contributed to our history. Yeah. But in order to do that fully, properly, and value that contribution, I think we need to set aside some time, a month, each year, to mark it, to celebrate it, record it, and make sure that coming generations know about it.
Yeah. So, Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the lady from Edinburgh West, and indeed a pleasure to speak in this debate about Jewish communities and the merits of having a Jewish History Month, and both, of course, have great merit, and recent events alone exemplify why history is so very important. Those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it, as Winston Churchill, I think, said. And one of the things that characterises the Jewish communities around the world, as well as in the United Kingdom, is hope. Indeed, the Israeli national anthem is called Hatikva, or The Hope, and that is not an exuberant or jingoistic melody. In fact, it's rather a melancholy, moving tune that somehow reflects its message of hope rather than jubilation, as many national anthems do. And rather than speak about the Jewish community, as many honourable members from both sides have been doing this afternoon, I'd like to speak, as it were, to the Jewish community in this debate. And I spoke some weeks ago about why there was cause for hope, despite the increase in anti-Semitism, and I'd like to continue that theme. And I'd say to the Jewish people of the United Kingdom, and indeed any listening, many civilizations who have persecuted the Jews have risen and then fallen, and the Jews continue to thrive. One only needs to have a look at the Arch of Titus in Rome to see how empires come and go and rise and fall. The arch was built 2,000 years ago by the Romans under Emperor Domitian to celebrate the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and it depicts the plundering of that temple. But just a few weeks ago, that arch, celebrating the destruction of the Jews, was lit up in the colours of the Israeli flag by the government of Italy to mark the pogrom of the 7th of October. And there are many reasons to be hopeful. We should ignore the haters in our communities around the world who have clearly been responsible for the massive increase in anti-Semitism. Ignore the haters on university campuses who are bullying Jewish children who are now, I know, and I've heard from those young people, who are frightened to even go on campus. Eventually, some of those accounts will become widely known and they will shock the nation. We should ignore those in the international community, even the United Nations organization itself, where, frankly, there are blatant examples of anti-Semitism, and where, for example, just before Christmas, Iran was selected to sit on the Human Rights Council. We should instead celebrate those who are doing so much, those who are agents of peace and reconciliation that we don't hear enough about. Applaud men like the Bedouin Yusuf Ziadna, a minibus driver who saved 30 lives from that festival, the Nova Festival in Israel, by responding to a call, not Jewish man, to pick up a customer from that event, and he drove into Hamas's attack and drove out with a minibus full of Jewish people. They're alive because of him. Applaud a hero, Rami, who I met in Israel only a few days ago, who saved over 700 lives by driving into that war zone, to and fro, to rescue people. Applaud people like the Crown Prince of Bahrain, who said, what Hamas did on the 7th of October was a war crime and an atrocity, and it's important to get all the abductees out of Gaza. Not easy for some leaders, Arab leaders especially, to say those truths, but that is a true leader. And the Emirates, the Emiratis, Ali Rashid al-Nuami, a top Emirati official who said that the Accords, the Abraham Accords, are our future. It's not an agreement between two governments, but a platform to transform the region. An heroic statement. The Saudi Defence Minister, Khalid bin Salman, who visited the White House and said that he reaffirmed his country's interest in pursuing the Abraham Accords. Real courage, real leadership, things that the Jewish community should and will value in this country and around the world. And our own political leaders on all sides, this is not a partisan issue, for standing up and doing the right thing in the face of dissent. And we have, of course, a great hero in our sovereign, the King, who can influence events, who has long-standing personal relationships, a love of the Arab culture, deep interest in the Muslim religion, but who, in fact, had the chief rabbi as a guest before his coronation so that the chief rabbi did not have to walk on the Sabbath. Heroes come in many forms, hope comes through many routes.
Shannon.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, can I first of all thank the person who introduced the Honourable Lady for setting the scene so very well. I declare an interest as a friend of Israel. My comments will reflect the support for this wee nation with a big heart, much like our own nation of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is a case of point showing not just the importance of the contribution made by the Jewish community to the social, cultural and economic life of the province, but also the interest that there is in the history of contribution from the wider community. Since its inception, the British Belfast Jewish Heritage Project has attracted hundreds of people on its guided walking tours in Belfast city centre. The tour includes familiar sites in Belfast which have a Jewish connection, some connections which people born and bred in Belfast have no idea. For example, the oldest library in the city, the Linen Hall Library, was originally the linen warehouse of a textile company called Millar and Weinberg. The Jaffa Fountain at Victoria Square is named after Daniel Joseph Jaffa, the founder of the Belfast Jewish community and the father of the only Jewish Lord Mayor of Belfast, Sir Otto Jaffa, my honourable friend from Northampton referred to. In 2021, the Belfast Jewish Heritage Project was awarded a grant of £10,000 from the Shared History Fund commemorating the centenary of Northern Ireland. The Shared History Fund was funded by the Northern Ireland Office and administered by National Heritage. A lasting legacy of the grant is the interactive online Jewish heritage map of Northern Ireland, which tells the Jewish story over 70 locations right across Northern Ireland. And so when you talk about Jewish History Month, I can tell you some of that Jewish History Month we have in Northern Ireland. This has not been an exhaustive list by any means of the wonderful connections. I think of the farm in my constituency, McGill's farm at Drumfad Road in Mill Island, in my constituency of Strangford, which was used to house children who were rescued from Nazi Germany as another place of interest. The Kinder children came through that. It was clear, it's clear that the Jewish History Month in Northern Ireland would have no shortage of material or indeed stories and a great deal of support from across the community. I can only imagine the scale of the replication in other communities across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland as we become aware of how intrinsically linked the people of the Jewish faith are in the fabric of our British culture. Because that's the key of this debate and what the Honourable Lady has set the scene. They are part of what we are as British, and we should be welcoming them, as the Leader of the House said in an excellent contribution earlier on. Whilst I believe the content for this month is there, I believe there is also a need for people to understand the connections between us all and Northern Ireland. I'm painfully aware of the problem with identity politics and forgetting the connections that bind us. As one person who was on the Jewish Heritage Trail walk in Belfast put it, it was amazing to have an hour-long history tour of Belfast, so it wasn't about Protestants and Catholics. Sadly, there's a good cause to enhance our appreciation and understanding of Jewish contribution to Northern Ireland, as sadly it is not immune from the surge of anti-Semitic incidents and actions recorded by the Community Security Trust. There's been so much from back in 2014, attacked by vandals on desecrating of headstones as well, and also the blue plaque for Team HoC was removed as well. Yet it represents a remarkable connection. All those things that have happened between Belfast and Israel was just over a century ago had a future Israeli prison, chief rabbi and foreign minister living in it. Disgraceful that this Jewish section of the city cemetery has been repeatedly desecrated and destroyed. I therefore welcome very much a Jewish History Month because it would increase the awareness of our general population, the remarkable place of the Jewish community in our society, challenge anti-Semitic stereotypes and myths, and inject confidence and pride to the Jewish community itself. The Jewish people are not, Mr. Deputy, are not some sect to be observed, that they are a part of us in this chamber, the best of British, and I believe it should be understood and emphasised not simply for a month, but on the ongoing basis until these people cease to be ostracised or hated simply because they worship God in a different way than someone else does. They are people used to persecution, but that does not make it right. We have hope in God, the same God that I worship. But today let them find hope in this place as we highlight the wonderful good that has been done and is still to come by those who are British and worship their God with dignity and respect, and in no way offensive to any other person or religion. I don't have time to quote Psalm 27, but I leave Psalm 27 for those afterwards to read, because that tells you all about the Israeli people and how their God looks after them.
Thank you. Nicola Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and my thanks also to my honourable friend, the Member for Sisters of London and Westminster, for securing this debate. Earlier this week, I led a Westminster Hall debate on the appalling rise of anti-Semitism that we've seen in the UK since the October 7th attacks. That debate was sadly necessary given the circumstances, but I'm glad that today we have the opportunity for a much more positive debate to acknowledge the enormous contribution of the Jewish community here in the UK. I wish to open my remarks by recognising the Jewish community in the West Midlands, some of whom I met with in the weeks following the awful events in Israel on October the 7th. Many in the Jewish community have personal connections to those directly affected. Their strength and bravery in the face of this terror has been commendable, and I want to reaffirm my commitment again today to stand with the community in their hour of need. At Singers Hill Synagogue in Birmingham, we met Rabbi Jacobs, who told me how the Jewish community stood with the Muslim community in the wake of the attacks on innocent Muslims in the days after 9/11. The late Rabbi Tan visited the imam at Birmingham Central Mosque at the time to show solidarity, leading to the formation of Birmingham Faith Leaders Group, which continues to this day. Rabbi Tan's gesture was reciprocated in the wake of last year's attacks, with the imam visiting Singers Hill Synagogue for a Friday night service alongside other faith leaders to show support to the local Jewish community. This is a more recent development in the history of the Jewish community in the West Midlands, but one that they are proud of. Most know Birmingham has a long tradition of thriving Jewish communities, but most aren't aware Wolverhampton once had one too. Thanks to the Jewish Genealogical Society, who have pulled together years of records, we know more about that community. In Wolverhampton, the building of the synagogue still stands, but today is a church. In 1858, after the community had collected £300, they built Wolverhampton Synagogue, and it was opened by Chief Rabbi Dr. Adler. In 1903, after a fire, it was rebuilt by a local architect. When the community stopped growing and numbers reduced, the congregation merged with Singers Hill Synagogue. Today we have 5 active synagogues in the region, all contributing to the community and promoting understanding, tolerance and harmony between people of different faiths and in our area. They open their doors to thousands of children each year to learn more about Judaism and commendably organise donations to charities helping to provide for those in need. It's only right to pay tribute to some of our local rabbis, Rabbi Jacobs, Rabbi Hambling and Rabbi Pink. Like all religious leaders, they inspire their communities, they're their support and their guide, they're there for advice, celebrations and difficult times too. It's not just religious leaders who do so much for others. Ruth Jacobs is a perfect example of this. Through organisations like West Midlands Jewish Representative Council, which she chairs, as well as Nisa Nashim, an interfaith forum for Jewish and Muslim women to bridge the divide and discuss their cultural and religious similarities. Ruth's commitment to the community extends to her role as chair of the West Midlands Friends of Israel and her work with the local police and political leaders. She runs a local Hillel house which provides housing and support for Jewish students and hosts many social and religious events. It's people like Ruth who make the West Midlands community so warm and friendly whilst playing their part in making the region a better place for all communities. It's not possible to mention all the contributions that the Jewish community in the West Midlands makes to our region and across the country, but I'm just going to try and fit in a few more. The King David School in Birmingham is a beacon of light in the West Midlands. It's a Jewish primary school which welcomes all faiths and has a majority of Muslim students. I'd also like to mention Mindu Hornick, MBE, a Holocaust survivor who settled with her family in Birmingham. She's given her testimony of the Holocaust to thousands of people across the country and spoken in countless schools in our region. Many Holocaust survivors like Mindu are selfless in the work they do, and we owe them a great deal. She's one of the many UK-based survivors who have given their testimony in conjunction with the Holocaust Educational Trust. Next, Mr Deputy Speaker, High Cancer Care, a London-based charity that offers 67 specialised support services to cancer patients around the country, including in the West Midlands. They provide advice, counselling, physiotherapy and other support services from Sturchley in Birmingham. I visited their headquarters last year in Hendon with the JLC and they were incredible. There are many other Jewish organisations that sit under the umbrella of the JLC who all do incredible work, including the Jewish Women's Aid, United Jewish Israel Appeal and the Union of Jewish Students. Mr Deputy Speaker, these are just some of the examples today of the contribution of the Jewish community in the West Midlands and across the country. And in the West Midlands, we're incredibly diverse. I have one of the most diverse constituencies. But the Jewish community in the West Midlands is smaller than elsewhere, but they well and truly punch above their weight. So as I've given examples of today, the Black Country also has a proud history of Jewish communities. A Jewish History Month will be the perfect opportunity to educate others about the history of the community that we may not otherwise know about, as well as celebrating the enormous contribution the community makes today. I thank my honourable friend for securing this debate today.
Nichols.
Mr Deputy Speaker, a point I've made on many occasions is that all too often public understanding of the Jewish community and the issues that matter to us will often be limited to anti-Semitism and the UK's relationship with Israel. Knowledge of Jewish history will largely be limited to the Holocaust. Now, this is not for a second to diminish the importance of these three topics, but to make the case for the fact that Jewish history, Jewish culture and tradition and the Jewish contribution to Britain is a much, much richer tapestry that we can all benefit from a much deeper understanding of. Within the Jewish community in the UK are represented different denominations, ethnic and cultural backgrounds, practices, histories and languages in the mix. And of course, two of my favourite features of this Jewish diversity, the food, and the old adage of 2 Jews, 3 opinions as a result. With all of this to teach and share, our community, tiny in size relative to the population of the UK and globe, cannot be expected to undertake these endeavours to bring greater awareness alone. I thought it might be illustrative for the House in demonstrating that every part of British history and British culture is also Jewish history and culture, to bring together 2 seemingly unrelated parts of my parliamentary work and to highlight the Jewish contribution. As a British Jew and of course a member of the APPGs relevant to our community, I'm also a Vice Chair of the APPG on wrestling. Thanks to the historian Bradley Craig, I know, for example, of the Jewish Flash Al Lipman from Aldgate, an immensely popular lightweight wrestling star of the 1940s. In the wake of the war, there was a major Jewish show in Manchester in aid of Jewish charities, in which the good guy, who was Jewish, defeated the bad guy, who was portraying a Nazi. More recently, Jewish global wrestling star Noam Dar, who hails from Ayr in Scotland, wrestles for the WWE, performing for millions across the world, and has won the NXT Heritage Cup. He even once wrestled at a Jewish lads and girls brigade camp in Essex, organised by Neil Martin and Robert Rams, among others, 2 Jewish wrestling fans. Dar was followed in the main event of the second ever JLGB wrestling extravaganza by Simon Millar, who hosts the UK independent promotion Progress's shows, but has also wrestled across the country. Other British wrestlers and former wrestlers with Jewish links include the Chutzpah, Lior Ben David, Aviv Mayan, and Max Voltage Oliska of comedy duo Max and Ivan. And of course, there are numerous British comedians who are Jewish or with Jewish roots. British Jews are also proudly involved in other areas of the wrestling world, from WWE's head of external affairs, TNA's PR man, AEW's press lead in the US, the global Jewish wrestling superstar MJF, and ring announcer Justin Roberts. And Israel's best-known wrestling promoter, Gary Roif, actually came to Britain and has visited this house recently. There are also others, from Emily Reed, co-founder of the all-women's promotion Pro Wrestling Eve, Adam Kaler, who writes for the Daily Star about wrestling following his stint at the Jewish Telegraph, the wrestling photographer Ollie Sander, and the secretariat to both the APPG Against Anti-Semitism and the Wrestling APPG, Danny Stone, who is well known across this house, both for his expertise on anti-Semitism and on wrestling. So while small in number, British Jews have certainly made an impact on wrestling here in the UK and overseas. Now, in the hope that this will be the kind of debate we will see much more of in the future, I won't go through every APPG or committee I'm on through a Jewish lens, but I think it's to demonstrate that there are so many areas in which the Jewish contribution to British life, beyond those which are established or widely understood, a Jewish History Month could explore. Indeed, it's become a running joke with my friend Johnny Newton on so many occasions that I worry that we're willing it into a reality, about starting a podcast called Spicy Talmud, where we explore the volume collecting centuries of rabbinic discussion on not just every single worthy topic you could possibly conceive of considering, but all the more esoteric questions and sometimes bizarre stories it recounts, from whistling frogs, weasels bringing chametz from house to house, snakes getting where they shouldn't, and wine drinking she-dogs. But thankfully, for everyone's sake, I think it's safe to say we're both far too busy for the foreseeable future. But maybe there's another way the kind of love we both have and our wider community has for Jewishness and our pride in being part of the Jewish story can be brought to as wide an audience as possible so we can all share in it together. And what better way to start that than a dedicated Jewish History Month?
Thank you. Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady for Warrington North, not least because she has just improved my knowledge of wrestling from absolutely nothing to something.
Slightly more than
slightly more than nothing. I celebrate all those Jewish stars of the wrestling world, as I do all those individuals that my honourable friend for the City of London and Westminster and others have listed out from the world of entertainment, from politics, from industry, and so much more. Now, in Buckinghamshire, I'm delighted to say the Jewish population, according to the census, is growing. It has grown 7% between the 2011 census and the most recent census. It is a community that I stand absolutely shoulder to shoulder with and proud to represent and want to see thrive and go from strength to strength. But notwithstanding some of the very powerful comments that have been made about trying, as my honourable friend for Northampton North said, ignore the haters, I think we do have to acknowledge that Jewish communities in Buckinghamshire and across our whole country are hurting right now. I was privileged to join the South Buckinghamshire Jewish community at a Hanukkah event at Wadston Manor in my constituency in December, where, led by the wonderful Rabbi Neil James, the opening words he gave to that short ceremony really shocked me, where he used the words, we no longer feel confident to gather as a community. That's 2023 United Kingdom. Of course, every community should be confident to gather in the United Kingdom in modern times. They should all be afforded our protection. They should all feel safe. And it had struck me so much that as I put, as we in this house have a tendency to do, my thoughts about that wonderful event on social media, I said, I don't think unreasonably, that we must defeat anti-Semitism. And it took 45 seconds. 45 seconds for one of the haters to write underneath that post on Instagram, whoever Debbie.Bennett21 is, strange words must be defeated. What on earth was going through that individual's mind? And I saw it yesterday on a matter under another one of my posts that I have now reported to the police, where someone taking issue with something I had said about the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and perfectly legitimate for someone to take issue with my view on that, asked on Instagram, "Are you married to a Jew?" Absolutely outrageous behaviour that is happening in our country right now, and that absolutely has to be stamped out. Yeah. And why I wanted to come and say that in the Chamber this afternoon, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and to support my honourable friend for the City of London and Westminster in her call for a Jewish History Month, is that, of course, part of the reason, one of the most important reasons we study history, that we understand what has happened in the past, is to ensure that the mistakes of the past, the horrors of the past, the evil of the past, is not able to happen again and repeat itself. Yet we see it repeating itself. And that is why we simply must have the Jewish History Month, to celebrate the contribution of all of our Jewish communities, of everything that they have achieved and will continue to achieve in the future. And it was particularly brought home to me. And as members of Parliament, we all get very difficult emails. We all have people come to see us in our surgeries in very difficult circumstances with horrendous stories to tell. And it's very rare that those literally reduce us to tears. But when I received this email, and the identity of the constituent I will protect, from a Jewish constituent who openly said that she was scared, never felt as scared as she does right now in the UK, considered converting, has gone to ground, turned off her ability to be found on social media. That should scare us all. That must actually put a real bounce underneath us to ensure that we defeat anti-Semitism and we enable all Jewish communities, all people of the Jewish faith, to live freely, securely, safely and welcome here in the United Kingdom, whether they are British or otherwise.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and thanks to my honourable friend, the member of the Cities of London and Westminster, for securing this debate. And I've listened and learned a great deal from honourable members across the House for their contributions today. I think the variety and the richness of them reflects a lot of what we're talking about, that richness of contribution to British society. And it is that is the point where I'd like to start this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the British Jewish community has made a remarkable contribution to the prosperity of our nation. And in the face, sadly, of growing hostility abroad and shamefully here at home, I believe it is high time that we as a nation celebrate their part in our national story. So I'll do two things in the few minutes I have. First, I'd like to highlight the remarkable contribution made by the British Jewish community in Aberconwy today, and for that, I'd like to thank Professor Nathan Abrams of Bangor University and also the team at Llandudno Museum for their important work in tracing the history of North Wales and Aberconwy's Jewish residents. And then go on to raise and quickly dismiss an objection which I think we can anticipate to founding a British Jewish History Month. In Aberconwy, although they've never numbered more than a few hundred individuals, Jewish residents have played a prominent role in the recent history of our community. Aberconwy, sadly, is not without its reminders of a darker past. Conway's castle and walls were, of course, built by Edward I, notable for both his oppression of the Welsh, but also his expulsion of Jewish subjects in 1290. But primarily, arriving in Llandudno in the Victorian era, the new Jewish community was soon a key part of the area's booming economy and actively involved in the development and safeguarding of our local culture. Families such as the Kroops, Goubays, Wartskis and Blairmans founded shops that have become fixtures of our high streets, visible to this day, with the latter two founding international antique businesses which continue to prosper. We can also thank the Wartskis for the synagogue in Llandudno, which opened in 1909, and it's a testament to its legacy that modern-day Llandudno has the pleasure of welcoming a large number of Hasidic families each year. In more recent times, the first woman, Mayor of Aberconwy, was Jewish, Vicky Lazar, who was elected in 1978. And most recently, in a welcome twist of history, in 2012, care of those battlements in Conwy that King Edward built their care was voted into the competent hands of Cedric Regal, the first Jewish constable and mayor of Conwy, with a rabbi offering a prayer at the inauguration. However, Mr Deputy Speaker, in making the case for celebrating and formally recognising such contributions in Aberconwy and across the UK, we can anticipate an objection, albeit raised in good faith. In an era of increasingly divisive identitarian politics, it may well be asked, will such recognition encourage British people to think of themselves and one another in terms of ethnic or religious group identity? Does this not then risk compounding rather than easing division? Well, as the MP for a bilingual constituency, a proud Welshman and Brit, I think this is a profound misunderstanding of identity. Our British identity is not totalising. It does not demand the erosion of the regional and religious identities that make up our nation. We are privileged in Britain to inherit a nation that evolved long before liberal nationalist revolutions of the 19th century. Nations such as France, Italy and Germany engaging in assertive state-led nation building. In contrast, Britain emerged slowly as networks of kin, friendship and trade bound together the destinies of the peoples of our islands. In many European states, for example, standardised education was seized on as a means to erode regional identity. Yet here, and I speak of North Wales in this case, the fierce independence and plurality of educations have represented distinct religious and philosophical traditions. In North Wales, I'd also count our fierce tradition of non-conformism in that too. And it is when a community's story has become intertwined with that of the nation that it becomes part of the story of Britain, and such is the story of British Jews. It is significant, and it is a part of the story, our story, that deserves to be celebrated. Mr Deputy Speaker, in a world in which ethnic grievances are increasingly and easily stoked for political capital, here is a story of resilience and success. The British Jewish contribution to the arts, literature, commerce and science of the UK has enriched and elevated our national life, here and in Aberconwy, and it has improved the condition of humanity the world over. This is a story that should serve to inspire people of all backgrounds, and it is for this reason that I support the motion put before us today.
To move on to the front bench contributions, 6, 8 and 8. Although we're not putting the clock on front bench contributions, and if the Minister could leave a couple of minutes for the final word from Nickie Aiken. Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for the cities of London and Westminster on bringing this debate and the strength of the speech she gave to open it. I love where I live. I feel privileged every day to represent my own local community and to represent it in all its fantastic diversity. Because East Renfrewshire is home to people of all faiths and none, a vibrant and growing Muslim community, Christian congregations of all kinds, significant Sikh and Hindu communities, a lovely Baha'i communities, and we are also home to the majority of the Jews living in Scotland. And we are so much better for the diversity of people who've made their homes in East Renfrewshire. And that's why I was very pleased to join the Honourable Lady to seek this debate, because we absolutely should celebrate all the communities who make us who we are. Now, some people have referenced the timing of this debate to the very challenging times we live in, and perhaps that's true to some extent, but I think it's important to look at this in a different way and look at it through the prism of the history of the Jewish community in its own right. So today I want to give you a whistle-stop tour of that rich history in Scotland, but particularly in East Renfrewshire. The former Chief Rabbi, the late Jonathan Sacks, wrote about the Jewish communities of Scotland, combining a strong loyalty to their Jewish faith and way of life with a deep attachment to Scottish culture and identity. And that rings true to me and speaks to the long history of the Jewish community in Scotland. We heard about degrees being awarded in the 1700s. The first synagogues were opened in Edinburgh in 1817 and Glasgow in 1821. Terrible events in Russia and then Germany in particular led to mass movements of people and communities forming across Scotland. In 1914, the Glasgow Jewish Representative Council was founded. The only Jewish school in Scotland opened in 1962. The fantastic Jewish Archives Centre was founded in 1982 to collect, preserve and display Scotland's Jewish heritage, and perhaps that centre is worth thinking of as this debate in a physical form, a phenomenally interesting place. And throughout all that, everyday and less everyday contributions have been made year upon year to Scotland by our Jewish citizens, whether in medicine, law, education, business. That particular thread in the tartan of Scotland is woven deep and clear. Now, given the time of year, I will push that a little bit further in an appreciation of Rabbi Pete Tobias, not only for excellent work like bringing people together to share Passover Seder, but also for sharing with me a very funny Burns supper speech featuring someone named Rabbi Burns. And today does give us that opportunity to focus on the personal, to focus on people. People like East Renfrewshire resident, the late Ernest Levy, a survivor of Bergen-Belsen, cantor of the then Giffen and Newland Synagogue for 40 years, hugely influential in sharing testimony on the Holocaust. And he wrote a very important book, launched in the Scottish Parliament, and said at the time that he had never felt so Scottish in his life. And the senior rabbi of Scotland, Rabbi Moshe Rubin, whose consistent welcome to people of all faiths was warmly extended to our First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, when both men came together at a hugely moving synagogue service recently, very clearly demonstrating the importance of common humanity and concern for one another. Or East Renfrewshire resident Henry Wooga, 100 years old next month, who along with his late wife influenced hundreds of young Scottish people with their tireless focus on Holocaust education. People like Brigadier Monty Cowan, a brave veteran who, along with a great deal of community work, leads the local association of Jewish ex-servicemen and women. People like Evie Yed, whose work to support our local area in many and varied ways is long-standing. She is the hugely influential leader of the local Jewish Brownie and Guide Packs. She makes a profound difference to young lives. Or the wide-ranging work of Cosgrove Care, making such a positive difference to people with additional needs, or the great efforts of Jewish Care in supporting our community. Or there's the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities and the Glasgow Jewish Representative Council, who work tirelessly to support, to be a voice and to encourage discussion. And they work alongside other groups too, including Interfaith Glasgow and the Council for Christians and Jews. That cross-community and cross-faith dialogue is vitally important, including at events such as one recently where faith representatives and others heard from staff at Wood Farm High School speaking about their work with pupils on Jane Haining project, making sure our young people know our history, and the continued efforts locally of gathering the voices of Vision Schools and other educational projects cements that and cements who we are. And Mr Deputy Speaker, people like my late friend Frank Angel, whose work in dentistry, in education was important and influential. Frank was a political fellow traveller of mine and a scholar and is greatly missed. And I'd like to finish by speaking about Calderwood Lodge Primary School. Calderwood is 60 years on, at the very heart of our community, on a lovely new campus with its partner school, St Clair's Primary. A Jewish Catholic joint campus is a unique thing, and that shared ethos of understanding is valuable beyond words. That's exactly what we should be speaking about today. At this school, children of all faiths and none work and play, learning together about respect, about friendship, and about enjoyment of one another's traditions. So my community is a special one, and the contribution of Jewish residents to East Renfrewshire is a huge part of who we are. It's a big part of what makes us ourselves. We absolutely should celebrate all the communities that make us the different constituencies. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for the cities of London and Westminster for bringing us here today, and I wholeheartedly support her efforts.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for the cities of London and Westminster for securing this debate, which has been hugely interesting today. So I'd also like to thank the Honourable Members for Leeds North East, who told us about his family history, and the Member for Warrington North, who talked to us about wrestling in ways that I'd never thought of before. Now, in Westminster Hall on Tuesday, we heard from many members about shocking incidents of anti-Semitism on our streets, in schools and on university campuses. Now, that discussion was vital following the rise in anti-Semitism, which the UK has seen since the abhorrent attacks carried out by Hamas on October the 7th. Today's discussion is similarly vital. Now more than ever, it's essential that we recognise and celebrate the rich contribution of the Jewish community across the whole of British civil society, the whole of British life indeed. And just as I did on Tuesday, I want to thank the Community Security Trust, who work relentlessly alongside the police to gather records of anti-Semitic incidents and tackle hateful remarks. So over the last 40 years, the CST have developed a widely developed and recommended model for combating hate crime, and their work is absolutely essential. But there are many other examples of Jewish organisations that have contributed to the skills and experience they've honed within their own community to uplift our society as a whole. It serves to highlight the extraordinary contribution that Jewish communities have made to British social, cultural and political life, despite the adversity that they have all too often endured. As we've heard, historical records show that there were Jewish people in England at the time of the Norman conquest, but that they were victims of appalling persecution. In 1190, the Jewish community of York were massacred at the site of Clifford's Tower, and 100 years later, Jewish people were expelled on the orders of Edward I, not to return until the time of Oliver Cromwell. I talk about these shameful episodes because it's important that we in this country reckon with our own history of discrimination, prejudice and violence. But it's in the face of this adversity that Jewish communities in Britain have contributed so much to our vibrant and multicultural society across every region and every sector. In my own local authority of Gateshead, there is a large Haredi community with one of the largest yeshivas outside of Israel. It's long established at the heart of the town. Now, from their role in the trade union movement to the work of many Jewish communal and charitable organisations today, we have much to thank the Jewish community for. And of course, to thank those individuals that we've talked about today who've contributed so much. But I want to just say a little bit about one organisation called Jamie, who provide mental health support for the Jewish community in the UK. I was introduced to Jamie through the Jewish Leadership Council, who represent many Jewish communal organisations, as part of my work with the APPG on suicide and self-harm prevention. Jamie's Headroom Cafe in Golders Green offers open access to mental health support to anyone who needs it. I was so blown away when I visited the cafe that I went on to host a round table there, which was attended by other honourable members and many community organisations. I was really impressed by Jamie's commitment, not only to their own community, but also to working in partnership with other communities, organisations and local authorities, and I look forward to continuing to work with them. And there are many other Jewish organisations doing fantastic work right across the board. For example, I think of Jewish Women's Aid, who provides specialist support to Jewish women and children affected by domestic abuse. These organisations are working in difficult circumstances as the community continues to feel the impact of those October the 7th attacks. And as we know, the CST recorded between the 7th of October and the 13th of December more than 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents. More than ever, it's vitally important to educate people across our communities about the nature of anti-Semitism and hate crime and to combat it. And of course, this must include a continued commitment to education on the Holocaust. Organisations such as the Holocaust Education Trust have done much needed work to embed learning on the Holocaust within our education system and within broader society. And on the 27th of January we have Holocaust Memorial Day, and I know that the Trust will be in Parliament in the coming weeks to mark this important occasion. Now, amidst the threats of Holocaust denial and distortion, it's essential that this work continues. That's why we are proud to support the proposals for a permanent Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre. This will be a fitting tribute to the 6 million Jewish people who were brutally murdered during the Holocaust and a much-needed bulwark against misinformation and conspiracy. And it's also important to remember the really positive contributions as well, as we are talking about today, of individuals, organisations and the community. So I'm pleased to do that. Turning to the specific proposal for a British Jewish History Month, we are enthusiastic about the calls to remember British Jewish history, and Labour will work with the Jewish community organisations on the best shape that this should take. As events unfolding internationally risk divisions at home, we would also welcome government steps to work with local authorities on bolstering community cohesion and bringing people together. Mr Deputy Speaker, Labour is totally united with the Jewish community in the fight against anti-Semitism, to acknowledging the wrongdoings of the past, and also, as today, celebrating the rich and diverse contribution of British Jews to our proud multicultural society.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it is a privilege to respond on behalf of the Government and on behalf of my colleague Baroness Penn from the other place who formerly holds this portfolio on this incredibly important issue. And for many of us who are here today, we were also here in Westminster Hall on Tuesday debating a more difficult part of this discussion. And it's such a pleasure to be able to celebrate the contribution of the British Jewish community to our country, and I intend to keep my mark wholly to the positive, having talked about the other more challenging issues on Tuesday in the other debate. And I know from the contributions of all members today that all across the House we agree that Britain would not be the country it is today without the enormous contribution made by the Jewish community, and indeed people of all faiths and ethnicities, and it's crucial that we celebrate that contribution. That's why the Government is very supportive of having a Jewish History Month, a brilliant idea put forward in this debate by my honourable friend, the Member for Cities of London and Westminster, and I'd like to congratulate her on securing this important debate, because it is absolutely the case that British Jews have played a vital role in shaping the life of our country, stretching back more than 2,000 years, producing, as has already been outlined by so many colleagues, leading talents in arts, in law, in philosophy, in medicine, in media, in finance, in the charity sector, in retail and in wrestling. From Peter George Davis, the founder of the Special Boat Service, to Jack Cohen, the founder of Tesco, as my honourable friend already outlined, to Ludwig Gutmann, the founder of the Paralympics, and some of our greatest artists, Lucian Freud, poets like Siegfried Sassoon. British Jews have also made, as the honourable gentleman who's no longer in his place from Leeds North West outlined, an outstanding contribution to British public life from all sides of this House, from our first Prime Minister of Jewish heritage, Benjamin Disraeli, in the 19th century, to the Iron Chancellor Nigel Lawson, to the Liberal leader Herbert Samuel, and to celebrated Labour figures such as Gerald Kaufman and Manny Shimwell, as has already been outlined. The creation of a designated Jewish History Month would give us an opportunity as a nation to celebrate this history and the vibrancy of Jewish culture, traditions, values, and the importance of the Jewish community to the fabric of our society today. This could not be more important given the events of the last few weeks. But as the member for the Cities of London and Westminster has herself said, we must remind ourselves of the huge contribution that British citizens within the Jewish faith have made to the benefit of us all. And a designated History Month would be a huge step forward towards this. This is about celebrating Jewish history and culture, as well as the honourable gentleman from Strangford, who's no longer in his place, an opportunity to foster greater community unity and cohesion through interfaith dialogue and understanding at a time of growing division. I know that's something we would all very much welcome. It would, of course, need to be meaningful and informed by the wishes of the British Jewish community themselves. And so if this is something that the British Jewish community would encourage the government to support, then we would welcome their thoughts on this motion, as we would welcome the thoughts of all honourable and right honourable members around the House and anyone else inspired to take up this important cause. I want to spend a few minutes before I close just talking about some of the contributions of colleagues today. The stories of the honourable gentleman from Leeds North East and from Worthing West about the history and the importance and the incredible stories that we've heard and shocking stories that we've heard in at least one instance, which reminds us of the very near-term challenges that this community had and the importance of supporting them were able to. The honourable gentleman from Northampton and from Strangford reminded us of the contribution of the British Jewish community in all parts of our union, including something I never thought I would hear, the Sinn Féin rabbi, but demonstrating the absolute contribution over so many years in so many different ways and with so many different opinions over so many decades and centuries. My honourable friend from Brigg and Goole made a hugely important point about the importance of the British Jewish community to our public life and to our military life, and the honourable lady I'd happily give way for a moment.
As he has a little bit of time, and because of the time that I didn't get a chance to mention some of the East Yorkshire Jewish sons who fell in World War I, I would like to just memorialise their names, if you'll give me a moment, of James Aaron, Isaac Reuben, Barnett Rubinstein, Bernard Shagolsky, Solomon Soul, John Stone, David Gordon, Henry Fairman, all who fell defending liberty.
My honourable friend outlines another example of the hugely important contribution the British Jewish community have made to our freedom over so many decades. The honourable lady from Edinburgh West made a hugely important point about how often it is not obvious about the vast contribution that has been made. And like the challenges that she may have had in her home city, it is also the case that I had challenges of linking it to my home constituency where I grew up. It has a very small Jewish community, but having looked at some of the history from Derbyshire, it was heartening to hear just 20 years ago where a small group of people from Derby at the other side of the county had found in the archives a reference to how the citizens of Derby had paid an amount of money in the 12th century to stop British Jews from living in Derby, and so they compensated the British Jewish community by the equivalent amount in 2002, so that the edict could be removed. And it's those kinds of acts of kindness, acts of recognition of what has been referenced as a challenging history, can be acknowledged and can be worked through, and even in places where there aren't large Jewish populations like Derbyshire, that we can move through some of the challenge history that we have. My right honourable friend from Northampton North highlighted the important point about those who forget history are condemned to repeat it, and my honourable friend from West Bromwich East, who does so much on this hugely important subject and who was the genesis of the important debate that we had on Tuesday. And I know that she was also very keen, both her and Lord Austin from the other place are keen to acknowledge a gentleman who's in the public gallery today, Peter Madeley, who is a former reporter in the West Midlands, who has done so much over so many years to report on important issues for the Jewish community. The honourable lady from Warrington North, as I've already outlined, gave us some very interesting references to the wrestling community, but also points out the hugely important history, culture and contribution to Britain and how deep and broad it is from the Jewish community. My honourable friend from Buckingham made a hugely important point about the challenges that the community are currently facing, and my honourable friend from Aberconwy about the importance of shared heritage, but the ability to be able to reconcile all of that in a way which works for everybody, irrespective of faith, culture, ethnicity and background. And then finally, turning to my honourable friend from Cities of London and Westminster, honourable member who we both began our electoral journey together in the same place in Westminster in 2006. I had the privilege to represent a historically very Jewish area of Maida Vale, known in the 1880s as New Jerusalem, containing the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, and who we had the privilege to serve alongside such luminaries as Sir Simon Milton, Melvin Kaplan, Daniel Astaire, and Lord Mayor of former Lord Mayor of Westminster, who is also in the Public Gallery, Councillor Louise Hyams, and I'm incredibly grateful to my honourable friend for this debate today. Mr Deputy Speaker, it has been a privilege to be here today. It's a privilege to hear about the contribution that the Jewish community have made over so many years, decades and centuries to our country, and this government is wholly committed to honouring, celebrating and safeguarding the security of our Jewish communities. It's a commitment I know everybody, wherever they sit in this place, shares, and a commitment that we must work together to uphold, and one that is demonstrated by our support for the measures today.
And it's been a privilege and honour for me to chair this debate today. Nickie Aiken.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank everybody across this chamber today for taking part in what I think is a timely and a very important debate. I would also like to thank the Board of Deputies of British Jews, who have been really helpful to me and my team with research for my speech. I'd also like to thank the Jewish Chronicle for providing me with my first ever front page Leeds story this week, and also the Jewish News, who has a triple page on the British Jewish History Month merits, and I really hope that they will continue to support our campaign to bring this very important month to fruition. I certainly will.
A little bit of time, and as we were cut down and she started thanking everybody, can I just place on record also my thanks to the Hull History Centre, who have incredible resources available on the history of the Jewish community in Hull, and helped me today in some of the words I spoke.
It was a pleasure to allow that intervention. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is absolutely right. We continue to educate ourselves and future generations on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, and we obviously will be marking the Holocaust later on this month. But it is equally, and perhaps more important, that we must highlight and celebrate the achievements and contributions made by the Jewish community. The Jewish story in Britain is a positive and a negative one. It is a history of human suffering. It is a history of human perseverance. It is a story of human strength. But now more than ever, it is more important that British Jews know that their incredible contribution to this country is valued, and that the history of anti-Semitism must be understood. I would like to very quickly take this opportunity to thank a very special rabbi in my constituency, Rabbi Daniel Epstein of Western Marble Arch, who I'm sure is not impressed by my Hebrew this afternoon, but he provided me with the text from the Torah, which I repeated here today, and it is the Jewish community in the cities of London and Westminster, and across obviously the nation, that is so important to me, and has been so supportive of me, and has really led me to believe that it is now so important, more important than ever before, that we do have a British Jewish History Month, and I look forward to working with this government. I believe it is very positive towards this suggestion, and I look forward to working with the government and the Jewish community to make this proposal a reality. We must celebrate the British Jewish community. We must have a British Jewish History Month.
I've been an MP for 31 years, and there was one moment when one of my researchers asked for time off because there was a Jewish holiday, and then the other one asked for time off for the Jewish, and so the third one came, and I didn't appreciate that actually all my members of staff were Jewish. So I'm incredibly grateful for the contribution that they've made to my office personally. And yet again, this debate today demonstrates how good the House is when it comes together. The question is, as on the order papers, many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to